Welcome to the Obojima Podcast. My name is Jeremiah, and I'm with Adam and Ari, and we are the writers of Obojima. You are joining us for our weekly writers meeting where we sit down and we talk Obojima. We come up with some cool concepts that may or may not end up in the next book. We'll find out.
Book 2.
And today is a tumultuous, maybe not long asked for, but certainly talked about. Controversial.
A day that will live.
Choice that we made in the last book that we're rolling back. No, I'm just kidding. No, we're going to talk about it at least. And that's Clerics.
Bum, bum, bum.
We did not include Clerics in the first book. And
Why?
Because we hate you all. We want to see you suffer.
Why, Spock?
We didn't include Clerics, and I thought that would be okay.
There were reasons.
There was reasons.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of
bubbling
of
cacophony,
chatter amongst them people. Not necessarily in the Discord. I think it's just mostly anytime we post a video on social media about the subclasses, all of the comments, well, not all of them, but a decent amount of comments are like, where's the cleric?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, for reasons that's hard to explain in 144 characters, we didn't include the cleric in this book. But let's talk about why, and let's talk about if that was a mistake. Should we have clericed out? Should we have
questioned our infallibility?
Should we have called the big man himself and come down, summon someone? Okay, actually, somebody the other day said that Jesus Christ was a spirit in Obojima, and I was like, okay, yeah, let's go for it.
Shall we go there?
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so let's talk about our initial reasons why no cleric. And I think the easiest, lowest hanging fruit is no Pantheon.
Yeah.
Clerics are holy clergies of a god of some sort. And with the lack of a Pantheon, it felt like the right choice to potentially remove. But then someone might say, but Jeremiah, Adam, Ari, Adam, Jeremiah, what about paladins? You've included paladins.
Yes.
And to that I say, you've poked holes right through my ruse.
Yeah.
You have me.
You have removed the veil and seen the wizard for what he is.
And no, for that, I think for me, it came down to the paladin that we included and kind of how we're envisioning the paladin. And then also how I envision clerics specifically.
And I think it would be good to talk about why the paladin, because we discussed that. We were like, hey, the paladin is actually deriving their abilities through their discipline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is attributing the kind of magical potency in this thing by practice, by faith in certain tenets, which we felt matched very well with the paladin. If you want to go, it could also take inspiration from more Eastern swordsmen and things like that, and the practices there, and that there's also some Shintoism connections in that capacity. But then when it comes to the cleric, it felt very, to me, cleric feels like the epitome of almost like an organized religion, right? Like a man of the faith, a man of the cloth, who
your belief and your connection with the divine is like you're channeling this energy.
Right.
Yeah.
And so by giving the same explanation as we did the paladin, it's just like, well, why aren't in Obojima, why aren't they just the same thing? Like, why is the cleric different from the paladin if they are both doing the exact same thing to gain their power? Like, what is different? What's the differentiation that makes them two different subclasses? Except for the fact that a paladin is more likely to swing a weapon and a cleric's more likely to cast a ton of spells.
I mean, there's a couple things there. So first of all, the paladin takes an oath.
Right.
And I think there might be something that is some sort of magical bond about this oath that doesn't necessitate a deity. I think my big thing with the way clerics operate is the presence of clerics says a definitive statement about the world that we're building, and that says that there are gods, that there is a pantheon. And I know the way like D&D works, like you choose a domain, right? But a domain is something Adam and I were talking about on our drive down. Is the concept of a domain? Like you have the light domain. Now, that is an umbrella under which different gods from different pantheons from different D&D settings fit into. So, while yes, you choose a domain when you are a cleric, within that domain are gods. Yeah. Your source of power is not the domain of light. There's not like a domain of light as a like another plane of existence or something like that, right? Your domain includes gods who are part of their respective pantheons.
Yeah.
So, and maybe there are places we could play where maybe the clerics here, the domains are aspects of different parts of reality that they're drawing energy from there or power from there. I'm happy to talk about that. If we had to say we have to make a cleric, let's talk about it there. But the definitive statement, like clerics themselves are fascinating characters because I can worship a god. Let's say I'm going to say Dragonlance because this is the one I know best.
You're in Dragonlance.
I'm in the setting of Dragonlance. I'm on Kryn, and this is let's say I worship the god Kiri Jolith, who's the god of righteous war. Okay, and
as
whatever
we
that
all
means,
do.
and who has the best symbol? It's a bison. It's amazing.
I thought you were gonna say bicycle.
It's
a bicycle.
That's
it's a
Obojima.
penny farthing.
That's Obojima. But anyway, let's say I'm a cleric of Kiri Jolith. Or let's say I worship Kiri Jolith. I'm not a cleric, but I still worship this god. Doesn't mean that I am a cleric. Not all worshipers get divine powers. Clerics are unique individuals who are miracle workers who channel the power of their god. So whether they have been chosen by that god to be a vehicle for their power in the world,
their devotion,
right, or their devotion has been rewarded in some capacity. But not every. If you go to a church or a temple devoted to a particular god, doesn't mean that every attendant there is a cleric.
No.
In fact, the clerics are probably they could almost be like the equivalent of living saints, right?
Saint
like
Francis
there's something very special about clerics. And so, but there's the definitive, like in our world, there's the concept of uncertainty that if you're talking about a lot of Western religions in particular, if you're faith is integral to those religions, right? That's the uncertainty is actually very important, so that faith is the thing that carries you into your spirituality.
Yeah.
If there is certainty and the existence of clerics and miracles being, like divine magic actually being active in the world, there's no sense of are the gods real or are they not real? No, they're real. We actually saw that person resurrect somebody from the dead yesterday. That's so. If we were to say we shied away even from big kind of religions on Obojima, but even if there were religions, there might not be clerics because we're making the statement that these religions then are true, that they have the truth of reality.
Yeah.
And that means other people don't have the truth. They're just wrong in their religion. You know what I mean? So clerics, they're saying something definitive about the spiritual aspects of spiritual not spiritual like in the spirit realm, but in terms of religious aspects of the world, that Obojima is just not really built around. It's not built around pantheons or a pantheon and stuff like that. So that's why we didn't include clerics to begin with, is there were other things going on beyond the material realm that we found perhaps more interesting, or that we just thought a pantheon of God, the gods in fantasy worlds have so much gravitational pull in terms of what's important about that world. And we didn't want to include that in Obojima, at least in these initial talks. But the idea of there being, because we're not even using the same cosmic map that D&D uses, right? We don't have all the different planes. We have two realms, at least as far as we know, right?
Dual plane.
That's it. But if there was a situation where if we wanted to do bring in clerics and actually double down on the domain concept, that there are, like, I guess the question then becomes, if there are clerics, let me back up. If there are clerics, what is the source of their power? What is the source of divine energy and power in a world without a pantheon?
Yeah.
Right, because it's, you start to list the things, right? Well, what if they draw their power from nature?
Yeah,
Okay, well,
like
that's
elemental. It'd be a cleric of fire, cleric of water, earth.
And then it's like, but how we're stepping on the toes of druids now.
Yep.
Then it's like, well, you can't do found magic or magic through incantation is wizard. There's bardic magic, which already bard magic already kind of confuses me in general. But yeah, I would say it's probably if I'm going to describe it, the same magic that wizards are tapping into. They've just discovered a new way to do it, right? And then sorcerer comes from within. Warlock is through the pact. If we're going into pact magic, which is like, okay, warlock. The cleric you could almost look like you could see the warlock and the cleric being the most similar to each other. And in fact, if we wanted to, I think the way you would add cleric, the easiest way to add cleric would be to replace the warlock and kind of have something in that capacity. But I think warlock makes more sense because they're known for making pacts with beings to gain power. And so then it's like, well, what other cosmic energy exists?
You could tie them. I mean, you could slice up the concept of spirits thinner, right? So if I'm a warlock, I'm making a pact with a spirit.
Yeah.
But it could be of a certain caliber or tier.
Yeah.
And if I wanted to do cleric, I could say that there's something fundamentally different about elder spirits, right? Elder spirits, but I remember having these conversations early on.
Yeah.
We didn't want elder spirits to essentially be just stand-ins for gods.
Exactly. That's the issue by giving them this ability to grant power in this capacity. Is they're just a new flavor of minor gods,
I mean, is it that warlocks it's their relationship is personal, and maybe if we were going to do clerics, it would be non-personal. Like a cleric really in Obojima isn't having a personal pact with an elder spirit or with a coven or with whatever, but a cleric is having a non-personal experience with an energy that they don't understand. So it's something that's mysterious. Whereas in D&D, a cleric is like, I'm a worshiper of Kiri Jolith, and for some reason, out of all these worshippers, Kiri Jolith has chosen me to be a divine channel to heal and to smite. Whereas in Obojima, it's like, I don't know what I'm in contact with. All I know is that I can do these things.
And that's different experientially than the way sorcerers exist.
It's a non-personal experience. So, and through that, it's kind of maybe other people are saying what they think it is. Some people are saying, you are chosen by Obojima, and other people are, it's like in Life of Brian where they're like, you worship the shoe, and it's like, they could be saying what they think it is. Oh, you are chosen by the river god, or you are chosen by the thing. And the actual cleric, if you ask them, they're just like, I don't know what it is.
I just hear the voice, right?
Or I feel the energy coming through me in it, and when I want to use it, or however.
So if that's the case, let's I want to entertain that for a moment, because there's something interesting about that, because it's that mystery. But okay, so a couple things to unpack there. So there is a mystery, but there's truth to that mystery, right? If I'm actually essentially doing miracles, I'm stitching wounds with my magic, but I don't know the source. There is a source, though.
Yeah.
Right.
Because that's the definition of a cleric.
Right. That is, it's actually happening. Yeah. So it's not just me saying I've been chosen and I'm a messianic figure, but there's no proof. There's just somebody has to believe that I'm a messianic figure.
Yeah.
If I'm actually doing the things.
Yeah.
Like what? And even though if we keep the source mysterious, we never define it. We have to understand that there is a source of that power.
Yes.
Like that divine power is coming through in some fashion.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what that is.
I think even the word divine is generates a definition of sorts. It could just be that this is an energy that then this cleric character uses to cast spells.
But there are like abilities and spells that
that are divine smite.
Yeah.
But also we would have to define the abilities that they generate, and if even the lack of flavor is a flavor. So if it's like, oh yeah, I deal force damage, which is just like general magic damage, right? It's like, well, you're not dealing fire damage, so you can't be the the fire spirit, in the core of the mountain. You're not doing force damage, so it's not the strength of the river. So it's like,
and I think the D&D, like we would also have to errata, like how we've done it in Obojima, where we said, hey, if you really want to play an Obojima game, these are the spells that are kind of out.
Yeah,
you're not going to cast them here. I think you'd have to do that with the cleric spell list, because they're fortunately or unfortunately are really flavored to be like, this is god magic.
Because that's the top-down story.
Yeah,
but that's like we could do a lot of these just kind of like we can do a lot of the gymnastics to make a cleric subclass fit. And again, we haven't even talked about subclass. We're just talking conceptually clerics, right? Because clerics are about their domain. Like when I'm selecting a cleric, I'm choosing a domain, and that really tells me the flavor of cleric that I am. So if I'm choosing the light domain, in terms of like, if this model of cleric we wanted to pursue, if this was the one we wanted to pursue, I could still be a cleric of light. I don't know the source of my magic, but I could do healing, right? If we were to create a subclass for it, we have to create a new domain for it, right? So first we have to explain what is a cleric on Obojima, and then what is a fun in-world flavor that we were talking about. If there was a domain of travel, right? Like oftentimes if you look at ancient travelers, they were like, they would serve up offerings for a safe passage and stuff like that. So if there was a cleric about travel, that feels very Obojima. But, still there's the question of like, is the juice worth the squeeze in this case for, like, I know that we've done subclasses for all other classes, but do clerics, let me back up for a second. One of the things that I think I really love about D&D settings is that they offer something that there's a reason you play this and not that setting, right? Like not every setting needs to include every aspect of D&D.
Yeah.
Right? And that gives it its unique flavor. The fact that healing spells are at a premium on Obojima, even though it's not a particularly lethal place, it's still, if you don't have a cleric in the party, like, you have to be extra careful, right? Like, so much of D&D is like, all right, who's gonna? Oh, nobody's the cleric. I guess I'll be the cleric, because you need the medic, right? Like that's kind of a thing. And obviously, this will necessitate people to be more creative in the way they approach the world. And so, if this is a world where clerics aren't necessarily a part of it, I guess how much do you lose from?
Well, it's not a combat heavy world,
right?
So that's really kind of, in a combat heavy world, you totally need clerics.
Yeah,
because the game is built that way.
Yeah, but in a non-combat heavy, you kind of don't.
I think the other question too is, in society, what role do clerics provide if they did exist? So let's say like travel. Let's say somehow, like old school god creation here, right? Like a society is built up on the things that they like. So this society likes gambling, they like traveling, and they love trickery, right? Like those are the things and so all of a sudden the gods in their pantheon are formed, and there's a god of trickery and travel, and a god of love or whatever, or food and party or something. And then people start to worship it, and then you make idols and all that jazz, right? It's the classic boy meets idol god type situation, right?
Boy needs something, boy invents God.
Yeah, so let's just say that, like, maybe travel is talked about constantly in Obojima, and there's almost like an idolization of it, and now people are able to form magical bonds with the concept of travel, and they can now make whatever. what are they actually? What's the purpose that this cleric is serving? That people would dedicate themselves and or start to gain magic through this way? Because it's not like we don't have magic, because magic's everywhere, and magic, there's 1,000 purposes the magic is formed, and it's not like a starts as a profession, turns into a subclass type situation like the rogue might have had, and it's not a situation of circumstance like the fighter who is transformed into their current version based off of whatever they based off of them being next to a dying spirit, and it's not like the sorcerer who was born with this unique ability. So why did the cleric form into society, and why are they actively pursuing this profession / calling? What do they do? Why are they there?
Right. I mean, if it's about travel, then I think that would be a subclass that I could imagine dovetails pretty nicely with the courier brigade. You can imagine these are special, like we were talking about, like the Knights Templar.
Yep.
When the Knights Templar in history started as a group that protected pilgrims on the way to the Holy Land, right? Like that was their jam. So if you had, obviously we don't have pilgrimage sites on Obojima, but if you had essentially, you imagine these kind of divine protector escorts that could bring people from place to place. I could see how that could have gotten started, right? Especially as like the first knock. Again, this is all hypothetical. This is not canon yet. You can imagine like early Nakudama adventurers could have been dedicated to, like, there might have been like the Cult of the Horizon, right? And so their whole deal is going into the unknown. Did it again? Going into the unknown to see what's there, to travel. Right.
Sure.
And so you can imagine this whole religion born of that. But again, just because they worship the idea of travel doesn't necessarily mean that there's a god for travel or a domain for that. Right. So this comes back to what is actually this, because I believe hard enough. Do I get powers?
Yeah.
What actually is it? And if we're saying there is not a pantheon, I could imagine, let's say we started Obojima from zero, started over, and we're just like, we don't want a pantheon, but we don't want to say that there has never been gods.
Right.
Okay, I can imagine a cleric subclass that is all about taking care of relics, right? This is a reliquary cleric, and they actually get power from stuff. And now this dovetails with the first age technology, right?
Yeah.
They could actually get some things out of this. But then that implies that there was a religion at some point, and there was a god that has maybe since gone dormant, and now they're rediscovering it, right? And so this is, but now because gods have so much narrative pull, that it's like, whoa, gods are returning to Obojima. No, that's not the story of Obojima, right?
I mean, that's the thing is, like, as we have it standing now, Obojima, the island itself, is kind of if I was to say there's an apex of the spiritual power of this world, it's Obojima itself.
It kind of has its own, it's weird nebulous will, right?
It's just, it's a planet, the planet or the Gaia of this world that's it. That's the apex of it. And like you said, as soon as we say there's a cleric that's accessing a god that is other than Obojima, now there's something greater, something that created Obojima. It's like...
And you're also acknowledging that Obojima as an entity is divine and is godlike, which is, we're kind of saying that it has these qualities, but we're not definitively saying... it's a god, or that you can ask it for favors, things like that.
Or it chooses people to do its will.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where I'm kind of, if somebody was to, like, put a bazooka to my head and say, you must make a cleric for Obojima, that's what I would do. I would say it's a non-personal mystery that this class or this character, the subclass of Obojima, like, encounters. Their knee jerk will be to say, I think it's Obojima, but it hasn't explicitly said that. Or maybe just even in their interaction with it, they're overcome with an understanding that it's actually it's something that must not be named. But
also I feel like the concept of communing with this entity also is giving Obojima an amount of sentience that perhaps isn't necessarily what we're going for.
Yeah.
Like you could like if we went in that direction, I would imagine almost like I ask questions and I'm overwhelmed with feeling, not with
words.
with a word.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'd be like,
Let me tell you, Jeremiah, this is what.
yeah,
you know, it's
exactly.
Like,
So
no.
I'd be
It's
like,
impressions.
should I be, is this the right choice for me to embark with this adventuring party and head to the top of Mount Abora? And then you feel this, like intense feeling of
To smite.
Divine
Like,
smite.
that's where like it breaks for me.
Yeah.
Right. Is like what clerics do. Is
Paladins do a lot of smiting.
Right. Sure. I mean, paladins do a lot of smiting. Their oaths are about action.
Yeah.
Right. So that to me is a little bit different. I mean, the divine element, okay, it's not the perfect fit, but like for a cleric, so much of it is like the rightness of their belief.
Yeah.
Which means everyone else is wrong.
But I think that's where we'd have to say, here are the spells from the cleric list that you can use, and here's the abilities, if you're going to play an Obojima game. I think also that when there's like, and those spells would be flavored. Like I remember for Curse of Strahd, if you go to Barovia, when you cast Magic Missile, it's like bones instead of these, the blazings of energy or whatever they are in the regular D&D game. Like
this guy just throw a femur at me.
yeah, it's just like spiky bone. So in Obojima, it's like to reflavor those clerical spells. And then the thing, like when you were saying, like when you sit down, you ask, like, what should I do? It might not be even something that comes within you. It might be that a tree branch breaks off a tree and kind of lands and it points in a direction. Something weird where you're like, is that
You're being guided in some way.
the island? Like that idea of it's non-personal. It isn't like you're saying. It's like it's not words. It's not an intellectual thing. It's a feeling, and then it's also signs in the environment that.
But then with that, again, it almost starts leaning into this level of like, is this Obojima, which is an embodiment of nature?
Yeah.
Are we almost just leaning into like, should this again just be a druid?
So, okay, before we explore the druid concept, because it feels druidic to me in some way, I had a thought about, okay, I'm kind of stuck on the concept of domains being actually like, metaphysical places, and that energy comes from that, cleric energy, cleric power. So what if, because one of the things we talked about wanting to do more in book 2 is exploring the concept of the spirit realm, right? So what if like we never really talked about or got into the origin of spirits, how spirits begin, and what is there a life cycle to a spirit and things like that. So I can imagine, and this is just throwing it out, like the concept is not a fully realized thought yet, that there might be these like metaphysical pools that are that exist. Either maybe even outside of the spirit realm, but this is where spirits come from. You almost think about like soul energy or something like that, and those pools, they resonate with the energy of that domain. So if you look at, there's a light domain. I don't know what this war domain, like a pool of
Spirit
like
domain.
So there might be these things where. What are all the domains for clerics? There's light, life, war.
Tempest.
What's that?
Tempest.
Yeah, tempest. So you might have all of these things that, as things emerge from this pool, maybe these like wisps of energy, they kind of congeal together, like combinations of those congeal, and that's how spirits are formed.
Yeah.
So there's this almost like primordial pre-spirit stuff. And these domains might be conduits to people. People can connect to them. The reason I go back to spirits is the spirit and the spirit realm is clearly this place of mystery and this place of supernatural happenings that bleed into our world, right? Like or into the material realm. And so that's clearly a thing that happens. And so clerics, again, might not be able to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to find, but there's still a source of that power.
Yeah.
So if it's these domains that kind of speak directly, or not speak, but like create these impressions, these these emanations to these particular people that are sensitive to that, I could imagine something like that. But I just don't know if we're doing all this narrative gymnastics to get here.
I think that was the exercise. Is like we're going to, just for the sake of fairness to those who wish to have clerics in Obojima, to like push on it as hard as we can.
Yep.
And I've got a push.
Oh,
All right.
I've got a push.
Tell us.
It's gonna sound pretty bardy, so ignore that part.
Gonna give us a bardy push here.
But what about the concept of like magic through story, right? Like the idea of maybe, because I was thinking, you mentioned earlier, this was like 20 minutes ago, you talked about Nonakdama. And I thought about the mythology and the otherworldliness and almost godlike nature that the queen of the Nakadama has in their mythology. History, as they might call it.
Yeah.
But, for the average person, like, there's no chance that the queen of Nakadama came, she swam across the great ocean and birthed 1,000 Nakadama all at once and like
killed the great crab.
Crab, did all this stuff. And it's like, it's godlike almost.
Yeah.
And it sounds like creation myth.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like, I don't know if that's true, but what if there was a Nakadama who believed in that myth?
That's literal.
That mythology so much that they were able to gain power from it in some capacity. Now, the issue is it's a religion.
Yeah, it is.
And they're just forming a religion. I think that's the problem a lot of clerics have, is the moment there's power that grants you there, a religion soon is to follow. Even if it's not organized. Not to say like, oh yeah, there's a church there and everyone, but it's like your practice and then ability to gain power from this practice will inspire others to follow in your footsteps. Thus,
right, there's a way of
religion,
life implied there.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And so like, my worry is like, my one, I don't know if that's the best thing, like a myth, like a story, it's a fun thing, I could spin it in a cool way, a story so potent it breathed truth to it in some capacity is like an interesting way of thinking about things. But then I think the problem is if the juice is worth the squeeze and we squeeze the juice, then there's juice there and the juice starts a juice store, and all of a sudden there's people donating 10% of their income to the juice store because that's how the juice works. And I don't, and I think we set out to have no religion on Obojima and
no juice.
No juice on Obojima.
Okay, let's not say that because it's starting to sound
juicy.
sound juicy. I think the problem is if they were to be successful in this, in the creation of a cleric, we would then be successful in creating an organized religion afterwards. And so my question is if we could, mythology aside, I don't know if that's a cool idea or not, mythology, cleric aside, if we figured out how to do it, would we be happy with ourselves?
Well, I think as we've gone through Obojima and we've developed it, like it just never seemed to feel in the vibe of like any kind of organized religion didn't seem to be in the vibe of Obojima. It just kind of felt against the grain. Obojima felt very natural, very organic, not like there weren't like scriptures and litanies and all these things of like it was more growing from the earth. It's very druidic, very and
I love that concept of what you're saying, that there's power in story. Like there's something really cool about that, that you can kind of like channel these myths to like evoke the characters from those myths. I think that's great. That's one of those things, like we run into this all the time in world building. Like that's awesome, but not right for this.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
We're going to put that in a file somewhere, and then at some point that's going to be the coolest thing for a particular idea.
Yeah.
Like Warhammer 40K, you want it. You want like there's all the rigidity of a a religion. And,
Or if I'm doing something that's Viking based and I
Yeah.
want some like a skald that could like the storyteller character that can do these amazing feats based on like the sagas, that's awesome.
Yes.
Like I love that concept, and I would play that in a heartbeat. But yeah, I just it's one of those things like. When we make stuff, or at least this is my philosophy on game design, I don't always do things just in parallel or for symmetry, for the sake of symmetry. And I know that for some people, like symmetry is very important. That everything got a thing. I just want to do what's right, and I want to do like, is there a compelling story that's correct for this world? That said, just because we three didn't come up with find a cool cleric thing, or maybe we did, and we'd have to ruminate on it more, doesn't mean that somebody's not going to.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think like baked into the cleric class, it's like, I don't know. It just seems that the cleric has things baked into it that just didn't puzzle piece fit with Obojima. But I'm, again, because, I worked long on Magic, the Gathering, it's like, it would be like having, white, red, blue, green, and no black. And it's like, well, that's not the game if it doesn't have that color. It needs 5 colors, right? In D&D, it's kind of the same thing. You've got all the character classes, and you just pulled out a cleric. And I can see why a lot of people are like,
sure.
Hey, it's not D&D anymore. And I think, there is this sort of, okay, yeah, there, that, but we're not doing traditional Dungeons and Dragons here. We are doing this.
We're
this
telling
world.
a new story.
Yeah, we're telling a new story, and it's going to feel different. And in this world, there just isn't that, because it's not because the cleric isn't a good class, isn't awesome, and doesn't have its place. And it's just
I usually play clerics. I'm usually clerics or fighters, by the way.
Yeah,
so.
well, because clerics is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, so like
I almost busted.
And yeah, this is definitely not like as an indictment or slight against anybody who likes playing clerics. This is one of those things where, if you're interested in playing clerics, also but you like Obojima, you could find ways to do that. Talk to your DM to do it. But it's also like it's worth thinking about, like, what are the implications of clerics in fantasy, in Dungeons and Dragons? What is the purpose of a cleric? What statements does it make about the world you're playing in? And what does the absence of that also say, right? And so I think there's something I personally like those kind of things. It's like, if let's say there were no wizards, but let's say there were warlocks, right? And we're not saying there's no magic, right? Let's say wizards don't exist here. It's like, is it because tomes of magic are forbidden and were destroyed?
Yeah,
Maybe these kind of like studied traditions were eradicated.
It's non-literate world,
right? Maybe it's a non-literate world, and there are powerful entities out there that are reaching out, tempting you into pacts, and that's how you can get power. That's why there are warlocks here, and you could build a whole thing around those concepts. The absence of something, of a game object, says a lot about the world. And so I
mean, that way, if like, let's say on Obojima, the only race that can be clerics are Nakodama, because of the fact of what you were saying, like that, because of their history, where their queen is this sort of godlike figure, that they're the only ones who have access to this, all these spells and all this power. That could be, sort of the workaround. If like you really want to play a cleric in Obojima, then that would probably be where I would start. Is this like, okay, Nakodama, you have to roll up a Nakodama. They're the only ones who have this sort of access to a divine power.
Here is what I would say, and this is said with love, everyone. But if you go to a taco restaurant, if you go to a Mexican restaurant, and you order, and your friend orders carne asada, and then the friend next to you orders an enchilada, and the person next to you orders nachos, and then it comes to you, and you go, I would really, really, really love if you could make me yakisoba. Yeah. And they turn to you and they go, I can make you yakisoba, but it's not going to be amazing because you're in a Mexican restaurant. The same thing I personally think could be said with clerics, which is like you could put a cleric in Obojima, but the world is not built for a cleric, and it is going to feel out of place unless you just change the restaurant drastically until it serves Mexican food and Japanese food, in which case, it's going to be its own thing. It won't be the Obojima that we made, and that's okay.
Yeah,
but
it also could be super fun.
It also could be awesome. Who doesn't love fusion?
Yeah.
The point is, though, like in the world that we're building, and the reason that we're not going to do it is because we're making a Mexican restaurant. And if you want to make your fusion restaurant, go for it. But currently, the way we see it, we have a vision full of burritos and tacos, and that's what we want to head for.
Delicioso.
Yeah.
Also love to hear people's cleric concepts.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm so curious.
Shoot them over.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like Ari said, as we write book 2 or book 3 or book 4, and all of a sudden something clicks, we'll go,
yeah,
it was here hidden beneath the sand all along.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the point, is that, in the spirit of open-mindedness and, like we haven't come to any hard conclusion about anything. Like if it works.
Yep.
And I think, Ari was mentioning earlier, if it's not about precluding just because of a whim. It's that we're building a world with a seriousness and really living in this thing, and things make sense.
Yeah.
And there's some things that don't make sense. And the cleric has this baggage, flavor baggage, spell named baggage, all this stuff. And then just also having Pantheon, which Obojima doesn't have Pantheon. It's trying to fit this square peg in a round hole. And in all fairness, we're like, all right, let's try to look at it. Let's try to push on it. And I think we've done that with a lot of things. Like we pushed on even paladins. I mean, there was a point where we're trying to figure out what is a paladin, how does it, and I was like, well, maybe the paladin goes to a mountaintop and receives sort of this energy from a spirit, and it was like, it just doesn't feel right. You were like, because I remember you said, you're like, it's got to have something else to do with it. Like there's got to be some kind of, and then that's when it, like this thing of idea of discipline. And so, we've pushed on a lot of these things to try to get what feels right. Because I think you've been kind of the feeling holder of Obojima, and, Ari and I have been pushing around and doing stuff, and we've kind of, said, okay, Jeremiah, does this feel it? And you're like, that's it? Or you've been like, that just, no, it's this other thing. So yeah, lots of thought has gone into this, but yeah, give it the old school try here to see if we could shoehorn this class in.
Yeah. I mean, and again, it's no hate on cleric in general. Like Ari said, he plays clerics. Actually, the reason we don't have it is Adam and I had a conversation, and we said we want to make sure there's no dwarfs and there's no clerics because we don't want Ari in our game.
I know.
So true.
No, if you can think of a cleric, we would love to hear about it, because again, we just might have not. The idea might not be in our heads; it might be somewhere else.
Yeah.
But as far as it goes right now, I think we, at the end of our 45 minutes, we've still at the same conclusion.
I think yes, we have beaten that thing.
I just hope I hope you all understand. Like, we've done our due diligence on this, and
this is not a fast and loose choice we have made.
That being said, I'm ready to eat my words. So please, in the Discord, in the comments below, if this is a TikTok clip,
you are ready to eat your yakisoba.
I'm ready to eat my fusion. Please let us know if you have any cool ideas you think, or if you disagree with any of the stuff we say. We'd love to hear about like where we maybe went wrong, and maybe there's something at the end of the tunnel for us on the clerics.
Yeah,
but,
see the error of our ways.
Yeah, exactly. That being said, thank you so much for joining us on a very
this was
very
a heated one.
Well, it's just a very heavy writer's concept-y, less creative work and more just like world development, world building, and
make sure we understand our world a little bit more. You know?
Yeah.
So if you enjoyed this and you want to hear more stuff that's less creative and more just like hammering in concepts and us, figuring things out for Obojima, please let us know. Thank you again. Follow us on Discord and TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and Facebook. And we will catch you all next time. Thank you so much. Bye.